developers, that was an SSD.
Let's
We were
go.
very happy
Now
to
I'm
put in
live.
the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a
Come on,
deep
bro.
dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational
What are you
leap
saying,
while
Mark?
keeping the
Mark.
console sufficiently familiar with the
Who's
game.
Mark, bro? Oh, him.
I think about
Yes,
this in
him.
terms of
I'm like, who's Mark?
and revolution.
I just want to see
Now,
the console,
with
man.
PlayStation 1,
I
2,
don't care.
and 3, the
Alexa,
target was a revolution
what time
each
is it?
time with a
Seem
brand new
crispy, bro.
feature
I'm not even gonna lie to you.
that was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console.
6 to 12
In the
months.
past, I've called this time to triumph. Here's what I
That
had.
took
for
6 to
those
12 months to make that?
So
What
to be
happened?
clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game.
About him evolution?
Developers will be ambitious,
What does this
and it may
mean?
take them 6 years or so to realize their vision.
Hey, we got 10 people watching. Thank you guys for watching the stream. If you guys can leave a like, that'd be awesome.
Yep.
Also, I'm with Kingo X Chrisu.
Not change my name to King Chris, man.
King Chris?
Jesus Christ, man. This is terrible.
Can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time
1 to
needed
12
to
months.
support.
PS5?
So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike
Okay.
a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5,
Exactly
the
right.
GPU was definitely the
Yo,
area
they're not
that
gonna
felt
show the
most
PS5. They're gonna show
It's
like a
taking,
logo.
they're taking mad long, bro. Man,
Exactly.
familiar
Yo,
program.
who are
I'm-
those people? Those are
Ultimately,
fake
I think
people.
we ended up
Are
with
they?
something under a month of
Nah,
development.
no.
what's he talking
I don't
about?
know.
It's like we're striking about them.
You know what he's talking about, bro?
I'll go into a bit more
No.
detail later.
He's just
today.
chatting, yo.
Philosophy
Talking to random
and the
people.
specific
Who's the people
that
that look like statues, yo?
Exactly.
It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators and through them.
Just, I'm about to fall asleep, bro.
That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers.
Don't
The biggest
care,
feature in
bro.
this category is the custom engine for audio. That's
Jesus
today's
Christ.
final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't
3D
something
audio.
that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path.
I mean, they're supposed to do this
here
at
again
E3,
are
so
the
I mean,
three
they have
principles. The
to.
first being
Yes.
enabling
have to,
the
you know.
desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me,
It took
the
6 years to
SSD
make a
really
console.
is the
I
key
mean,
to
like,
the next
it takes a
generation.
while, bro.
It's a game changer. And it was the
Yeah, yeah,
number one
it's,
ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's
Yo,
probably
Neon, bro.
impossible,
Listen,
but
bro.
can
He's
we
just
put an
yapping.
SSD in it? That
Yo.
was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence
I
of a
just wanna
hard
see some
drive in every
action.
PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we
These
were
glasses
having
are
these
crooked, bro.
conversations, developers were already
It's not
finding
funny,
ways
bro.
to get the
Look
load
at goofball.
and a lot of developers
It's not
time
funny.
spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly
That's
fast
facts, though.
nor
That's facts.
flexible. If all your
Come on,
data
make
is
it
in one
faster.
block, which
It's
is
gonna be
very
fast. It's
very
SSD. You know it's gonna be
likely,
faster.
you can
Fast,
load
fast.
50 to 100
That's be better
megabytes a
Xbox, bro.
second,
You should be run
depending
16
on
to the
where
time, bro.
data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume
Yeah,
it's on the hard
facts.
drive.
Has to be. Has to
Loading
NVMe,
a
bro.
gigabyte takes
NVMe.
10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by a compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disc and 50% higher.
Why's the thing on, bro? Go away.
Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your
What's the
data
thing?
is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple
you.
locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish.
Alright, bro.
My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is
Don't
spending
get me here
2/3
dumb,
of
bro.
its time seeking, and only a third of its time
They better add
actually
more menu,
loading
bro. The
data.
interface looks garbage.
Putting all of
bro.
that together,
It does,
a
man.
gigabyte
Xbox
is
interface.
20
Xbox
seconds
interface is
to
clean,
load
bro.
from a hard
It's the only thing I like about Xbox.
Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load
Wait,
times
the
can be
PS4.
Or to put that
Hey, man, the
differently,
PS4
as a
when they
player,
have
you wait
6
for the game
gigabytes
to
of RAM.
finish, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a
Gigabytes?
blindingly fast SSD? We
5
could have
gigabytes?
5 GB
Instantaneous, bro. It's
Oh
over,
my
bro.
god.
It's
Oh my
over.
god.
It's over. It's over. It's over. It's over. It's over.
that don't have
Oh,
seats.
over.
yo, instantaneous seek time.
That's it. It's in,
And with
yo,
5 gigabytes, Chris.
yo, bruh,
Instant game. Yo, there's not gonna be any loading screen, bro.
bro.
As for
Imagine you don't know those games for nothing, bro.
this is next gen.
Imagine not the little GTA 5, bro.
Instead, we should
Just
be
starts
asking
up,
how
bro.
long to
2 new
load
buttons.
2 GB. And
What?
the answer
They said
is
that?
about
For the
a quarter
controller?
of a second.
Load
Isn't
time.
it
Look,
amazing?
two.
We're talking
It's not even a
2
second.
magnitude, meaning
It's
very
less than a second.
roughly
It's less than a second, bro.
100 times faster.
Yeah, that's
It's like-
crazy.
it's like
Which means at 5 gigabytes
One-
a second for the
over
SSD,
1/4
the
of a second,
potential is
bro.
that
5
the game
gigabytes per
peaks
second,
in
bro.
seconds.
Imagine.
There are no
Over
load
1/5,
screens,
1/5.
The game just fades down while
No,
loading
1/4,
a
1/4.
half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators,
He's
we go from
yapping,
trying to distract the
exactly.
player from how long
He is
fast
yapping,
travel is taking,
but at least
like
he's
those
talking facts.
Spider-Man subway rides,
Good facts,
to being
actually.
so
Not bad.
blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah,
But
it's
to
cool,
me,
man.
this
Shut up.
is
Come on.
not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD.
I don't.
The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer.
Bro, what are you saying about I want to see gameplay.
I think almost
Gameplay,
all
not
of us
pictures.
have experienced this
What is this,
in
bruh?
different
I
ways.
don't know.
Say we're
Somebody
making
drew
an
this.
adventure game when we have two
Look good,
rich
though.
environments
Drew is
where
nice.
we
It does not,
want
Chris.
enough textures
I
and
mean, look
knowledge
at the
to
detail,
build,
bruh.
which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we
Jack? Oh, yeah, Jack.
world into a number
That game's
of
fire, bro. Fan love
and
it.
then do some
Yeah, that's funny.
calculations with sight lines and run speeds, like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second
Who is he
target
looking
was
into?
to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's
Makes sense,
possible
makes
to load
sense.
textures for everything behind the player in that split second. If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes
mean,
of
Jace,
compressed
bro,
data you can load.
those
that sounds
like
about right
people,
for next gen.
I don't know if they can
Anyway,
talk.
back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm
I want
describing
to
here
see
are things that
some good.
Man, he's gonna talk for a while, man.
either level
Yeah,
design
so if
gets
you
a
guys
little
just,
bit boring
you know,
in places,
you guys,
or
we can just
the
talk
data is
right now. What do you
duplicated
guys
so
think the
many times
PlayStation
that it
5
no
is gonna
longer
look
fits
like?
on the Blu-ray disc.
I can, bro. I'll give
And
you
you
an
end up
example,
with
bro.
hard
It's
limits on the
it's
player's
gonna be
run
like
speed or driving speed.
it's gonna be like the PS4, but it's not gonna be as as like
And finally,
sliced.
I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough.
Exactly, bro. It's
With an
trash.
SSD, though, no seeks. So
Damn.
no need to make brand new files
Nah,
with
bro.
changes
Yo,
incorporated into
whoa.
them, which means
New Game
no
Plus mode is gonna be the
installs
hardest thing
as
you ever
we
play,
know
bro.
them today.
I'm back.
There's
said-
yet one more benefit.
Ram.
We're talking about
System memory can be
patch,
used
how
much
it's gonna
more
look like and all that.
On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard
But I
drive
want, bro,
is
the
very
PS5 to
distant
look
and
like a
difficult
to look
by the time you
smaller
realize you
and
need
like just
this
less
data, much too
dumb.
late
Like
to
PS4 looks
upload.
dumb.
So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means
16
a lot
gigabytes
of
of
the 8
RAM.
gigabytes of system
That's not even that
memory
much.
is idle.
It's really
It's
not.
just waiting there.
Is it
to be
DDR6?
Yeah.
on
Better be.
PlayStation 5, though,
There we
the
go.
SSD is very close to being
1 second of
full.
gameplay, most
Typically,
RAM
it's
juice
fast enough that when you realize
for
you
next
need
1 second of gameplay.
it,
Low
you can just
latency
load
bandwidth.
it from the SSD.
It's
and
better
use
be. It's
it.
better be good,
There's
bro.
no need to have lots
I
of
just want to
data
see how
parked
it
in
looks.
system
Please,
memory
Xbox,
waiting to
show
potentially
theirs,
be
bro.
used.
They
Please.
showed it. They
The
showed it a
different
long
way
time
of
ago.
saying
It's
that
not gonna
is that
be
most of RAM is
E3.
working.
They better make the UI different, bro. I swear to
This is
God,
one
it's
of
the
the
same
reasons
thing,
that
bro.
16 gigabytes
Because
of
the
DDR6
Xbox is the same
feels
UI.
right
They ain't
to
change it.
the
Neon said, shut up.
The presence of
Who,
the
me?
SSD
Ultra
reduces
fast
the
boot.
need for a massive
You talking to me?
generational increase in size.
Ultra high speed
Back
streaming.
to the dream of the SSD.
The dream.
Here's the setup.
Deduplicate game deal.
Boot the game.
Yeah. What?
No load
No
screens.
long patch installs. That's
Design
fire. So
freedom, meaning
updates
no
won't be that
twisty
long.
passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away. The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD
Oh, hold up,
and the
What I
game
want,
code
bro,
that
is
uses
it's
the
a new
Hold
God
up,
of
wait,
War.
Chris.
You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an
Wait.
SSD with 10
Wait,
times
wait,
the speed
wait.
of a standard hard
100.
drive, I probably see only double the loading
Yo,
speed, if that.
everything's 100 times
For
faster.
PlayStation 5, our goal was not
Please,
just that the SSD
Lord, show us some
would be
stuff.
100
I'm
times
mad- I'm
faster.
mad
So
behind.
every single potential bottleneck needs
Jace,
to be
I'm
addressed.
saying that, bro. I'm
And there
saying,
are a
bro.
lot
I
of them.
want to see.
Let's look at
the
check-in
thing.
and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're
That's
talking
true.
about, that last part,
I just need
moving
to
the
see,
data,
like,
meaning
everything go.
copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an
Xbox X
entire next-gen CPU
series.
core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads
Yeah,
get
just-
100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves,
I don't know
and
if
that
that's actually
massive
how it's gonna
stream
look like.
of
Maybe
data
that's like
starts
the
coming
concept,
off
yeah.
the SSD.
So
So
it
to
could be
solve
fun.
all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware,
Xbox 360,
namely
whatever. I
a
don't know
custom
yet, bro.
flash controller and a number of custom
It's
units
looking like
in
it
our
right
main
now.
chip. The flash controller in the
I don't see
SSD
a
was
goddamn
designed for
piece of
smooth,
hardware.
bottleneck-free operation, but
I just wanna
also
see
with
one little
games in
thing,
mind.
one
For
little
example,
thing,
there are 6
please.
levels of priority
Just
when
like
reading
even
from the
like,
SSD.
yo, like bro,
Priority is
like
very
a tip
important.
of
You
it.
can
Like
imagine
any
the
part
player
of the whole
heading into
piece
some
of
new
data.
location in the
PS5, bro, I
world
just
in the
want to see a
game
corner,
requesting a few
slice of it. I
gigabytes
don't
of
care.
textures.
I just want to
And
see it,
while
bro,
those
please.
textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak
wanna
a
see
few
it,
dying
man.
words. Having multiple
12 channel
priority levels lets
interface.
the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the
Yeah, you
storage.
guys know what he's talking
To
about.
reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with
I
a
just looked at the new design
12-channel
for the PS5.
interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more,
That's
but
right.
Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility
God,
to our
he
gaming
knows what's
audience
up,
to be
bro.
cost-effective
everybody's
with regards
rich.
to what we
That's what I'm
put in the
talking about.
console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the
You think
play
we could talk
patterns
like
of a
PS5
broad
without the
range
G1
of
and G2
gamers.
bonus?
We examined the specific
I
games
never
that they
heard
were
about the
playing over the
G1
course
and
of a
G2.
weekend,
Damn,
Was it supposed to be
or
like
a
talk to me,
month,
man.
sides
and
of
whether
it,
that
or
set of
behind
games
it,
would
like
fit
on the
properly on the
bottom
SSD.
of it?
We were able to
I miss
establish
mad
that
like right here.
friction
you're saying,
caused
bro.
by
This is the Xbox
reinstalls
One
or
controller, bro.
re-downloads
Would
would be
buttons
quite
be like
low.
right here,
And so
like
we
on the
locked
sides?
in on that
Wait,
what happened?
25
Yeah,
gigabyte
talking about.
size.
Five
We'll
is thick?
also
Yes,
prepare
sir.
multiple
Yes,
strategies
ma'am.
so
I don't
that
know.
those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment.
PS5 is thick, bro.
Back to the
This thing
flash
is looking
controller.
pretty
On
good.
the other side, it connects to
pretty
our main
good, but
custom
I wanna
chip
see
via 4
physical.
lanes of Gen 4 PCIe.
Physical.
Let the man speak a
tangible.
little bit more,
Inside
bro.
the main custom
Shut up,
chip is
Chris.
a
Bruh, let the man
pre-custom
speak,
unit
bruh.
How
dedicated
much would
to
PS5
IO.
cost?
Before we talk about what that does,
It costs around $500.
let's talk compression.
No.
Yeah, that's what they said.
PlayStation
They
4
said
used Z-Lib as
400.
its compression
Like, to
format.
make profit, they
We
need
decided to use
450.
it again on PlayStation 5.
So,
but
so
on
about
It was around-
oh.
yeah,
tour,
With tax, yes,
I learned about
$500.
this
Shut up, man.
called
Yes, bro.
Kraken
Damn.
from
Damn,
Rad
man.
Game Tools.
Yeah,
It's
but
like
like, if the PS5
Z-Link's
controller has
smarter
like
customers.
sticks in the
Simple,
back, bro. That's sticks
similar
what's it called?
types of
Paddles in the back. You
algorithms,
lit.
but
Yeah.
about
One of my
10%
viewers said
better compression, which is
G1,
pretty
G2,
big. That means
new
10%
buttons.
more
That's
gain
in the
on the
leaks.
UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was
Alright, now he's
already
talking too much,
becoming
bro.
a de facto industry standard. Half of
You're
the
like
teams I
1,000.
talked to
No,
were
I
either
can't go
using it
1,000.
or getting ready to
That's like a PC.
evaluate it. So we
They
hustled and
wouldn't
built a
sell it.
custom
It wouldn't be that much
decompressor
money, bro.
into
It
the
wouldn't be
I/O
that
wouldn't sell
unit,
for that
It would, it
one
would be that much,
capable
bro.
of handling
They wouldn't
over
make no profit.
5 gigabytes of Kraken format.
Nah, the speeds are.
input
I
data.
mean, but
that's actually really good
Apple
about
charges
After
their phones for that
decompression,
much, so
that
why
typically
wouldn't a
becomes 8
console do
or
the same?
9 gigabytes. But the
console-
unit
the-
Because they
itself
wouldn't
is
make
capable
profit,
of
bro.
outputting as much as 20
Well, they would make
gigabytes
profit,
a
but
second
not
Make
as
more
much
profit.
per
if the data
byte
happened
like
to
PS3
compress
happened. Because the
particularly
PS3 was
well.
like 500.
By the way, in
Put it down
terms of
300.
performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores.
It's most
That's
likely
what it would
500,
take
bro.
to decompress
Most likely,
the
hopefully.
Kraken stream with a conventional CPU.
What
There's
is
a
he
lot more
saying? What
in the
is he
custom
What is a
saying?
DMA
including
controller?
a dedicated DMA controller. The game
This is
can
the controller
direct exactly
SSD. So
where
why are
it
we
wants
still
to send
talking
the
about the
data coming
SSD?
off
I
of the
don't
SSD.
care.
This equates to another Zen 2 core or 2 in
Like,
terms
this
of its
is
cost
yapping,
performance.
bro.
Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's
Talking
2
too much,
dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2
Too
cores.
cheap.
They're there
500?
principally to direct the variety of custom hardware.
Yeah, exactly, for
around.
$1,000.
One
My
of the
PC is like
coprocessors is
600,
dedicated to SSD
something
updates.
like that.
This lets us
700.
bypass traditional file I/O and its
I know.
bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a
Doesn't.
lot of developers map and remap memory as
I don't
part of
care.
the I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are
They could've just added
coherency
in, like,
engines
chill
to
trailers,
assist
bro.
the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the
Jesus
SSD is
Christ.
read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed.
Nah,
You just
bro.
indicate
It wouldn't
what
be
data
$900,
you'd like to
bro.
read
That's too
from
much.
the
That's way
original
too much, bro.
uncompressed file, and where you'd like to put it, and the
way too
whole
much.
process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the Dream.
Oh
Thanks
my
to
God, the
all that
Dream. I get the
hardware,
Dream back.
Our
Can we-
5.5 gigabytes a second really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4, and allow the Dream
Damn
of
Dream,
no
man.
load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said
This man
that,
really loved the stream, man.
expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly,
Just me
and you may
myself?
very well want to add storage to whatever we put in the console. Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving
Bro, didn't
the
you already
price
say
of your
this, bro?
SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles,
What is
or
this?
you can
Oh,
copy
still
your
an SSD.
active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are
M2.
internal drives
M.2
that
you
can get
mean,
on the
idiot?
open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment.
Oh my
They
God.
connect through the custom I/O unit just like our SSD does. So they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about.
Okay.
Here's the catch, though.
That's cool, though.
That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours.
Okay,
Games
that's
that
not- that's
rely on the
expensive.
speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive.
Uh-huh.
When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything
What I
available
missed?
on
Alright, so basically,
At the time,
you're saying that
commercial M2
you can
drives
use
used PCIe 3.0,
M.2
and 4
SSDs
lanes of that
to
cap
expand the
out at
storage,
3.5
but
gigabytes.
it has to be
In
about
other words,
the same
no
size as their
PCIe
SSD, or it
3.0
won't work
drive can
properly.
hit the
So 1
required spec.
terabyte?
Yep.
M2
No,
drives
like,
with
the
PCIe
speed.
4.0
No,
are
no,
now
like,
out in the market.
look, see?
We're getting our samples and seeing 4
Ooh,
or
okay.
5 gigabytes
7
a second
gigabytes?
from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that
I thought it
saturate
said Apple.
4.0 and support
Yo, pew
7
pew.
gigabytes
Yo, what's up,
a
bro?
second.
Welcome to the
Having
stream.
said that, we are comparing
I'm
apples
dead.
and
I'm dead
oranges
yawning, bro.
because
This is boring.
that commercial
This is
M2
boring,
drive
bro.
will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority
This is
levels.
boring.
Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O
Well,
unit has to
I'll be doing the
arbitrate extra
same,
priority
but
rather than
I don't
the
have a
M2 drive's
PS4 no
flash
more.
controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives.
Our
Unlike
SSD,
internal hard
the
drives,
SSD,
there's
this SSD,
unfortunately no
that
standard
SSD.
for the height of an M2 drive. And some M2
Bro, why
drives
still
have
an SSD,
giant
bro?
heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans.
This actually might be like
Right
a
now,
2-hour
we're
stream,
getting
bro.
M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When
It's been
games
23
hit
minutes and
beta
he's talking about
ready for the
SSDs, Chris.
PlayStation 5 launch at year end, we'll also be doing some
23 minutes about
compatibility tests to make sure that the
SSDs.
This might be a
architecture
long stream, bro.
particular M2 drive
Like a
isn't
damn
too foreign for the
That'd be
games to
cool.
handle.
If we,
E3 conference,
Once
bro.
we've done
This is
that
like an E3
compatibility
conference.
testing, we should be able to start letting you know
That's what he said.
which
He said that
drives
in the
will
beginning of the
physically
stream
fit
because of
and which drive
coronavirus.
samples have
Bullshit.
benchmarked appropriately high
Wait a
for
minute.
testing.
That
It would
says
be
only
great
You have a
825
to have it by
gigabytes?
No, I
launch, but
sold
it's
mine
likely
because
to
I was
be
getting bored
a
of
bit
it.
past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive.
Okay,
until
so
we hear
the Xbox
Okay,
has a 1
back to
terabyte
our
SSD.
principles.
And it can load
Balancing
2.4
evolution
gigabytes of
and
data in
revolution
1
is
second. The
second.
PS4 has a
This was
825 gigabyte
definitely a
SSD,
recurring theme
but it can
with
load
the
5.5 gigabytes data per second. So
We
it's
need
faster.
new GPU features and capabilities.
It's faster.
If we only have
PS5 is
more
faster.
performance, it's not really a new generation of console.
Thank you, new
Of
features.
course,
Sure,
many of
Flop.
these capabilities
Poison
are
my
more
boy.
That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop.
open this thing.
But we aren't just looking for the performance.
Okay,
We
high
also need the
performance,
ability
high
to do
efficiency,
something
I
with
like
the
that.
GPU
New features,
that could not
that's
have
good.
been done before. And we need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need
AMD.
throughout the design process. As our solution to
Xbox
adding new
X is better?
features
No,
without
I don't know
blindsiding
yet.
developers,
No, it's not, bro.
we
Right
made
now,
sure that if
PS4
there were
is
new
faster, so
significant
it's way
features,
We don't know yet,
it
bro.
would be
We don't know yet.
optional
We don't
to
know.
use.
The only thing is
The
that
GPU
does a lot of
supports ray
space.
Xbox,
tracing,
bro,
but you don't have
like,
to use ray
when I
tracing
saw
to make your game.
The multiple games
The
that they can
GPU
run at the
supports
same time,
primitive
5
shaders
games,
that you can
and
release your
does
first
not
game
have
on
no loading
PlayStation
screen.
5
Well,
without
just to get
making
into
A
games.
little bit lower screen.
Yeah,
Before I
that's
get
pretty
into
good.
But, like, look.
Oh, AMD, wait, CPU,
I'd like
CPU.
to make clear 2
You did
points that
deep
can
into
be
Wait,
that,
the
right?
CPU, the GPU. Woohoo!
First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology.
It's
What does
RDNA
that
2,
mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by
How do you
re-architecting
remember
the
this whole
GPU
thing?
to put data
I
close to where
don't
it's
know.
needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that
I don't know
feature
why he's
set
obsessed
is
with
malleable,
SSDs, bro.
which is to say
I don't
we
know.
have
He's just
our
trying to
own
just,
needs
I
for
don't know.
PlayStation, and that can factor into
Hard.
what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly
I'm
the
obsessed
same time
with
as we release our
SSDs.
console, that means our collaboration with AMD
The SSD must be his
succeeds
favorite word. I
in
don't know.
producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be
Teraflops.
avoided as well.
Teraflop.
In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we
He wants
never
an
think that meant
SSD,
the
he wants an
capabilities and performance
SSD.
are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4.
Okay, backwards compatible. Alright, backwards compatible, okay.
One way you can achieve backwards compatibility
Alright, here we
is
go.
with the previous console's chipset,
guys,
consoles, like we did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive.
Okay.
A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked.
We didn't even talk about the PS3.
And we're expecting almost all
not gonna get PS3 games
at launch.
That's
or PS2.
They said that's garbage.
It should be
With
like
regards to
that,
new
but
features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground,
watch
but at the
this
same time not to require use of the new GPU capability.
This was like one PS3 game
For more
that
than
I
a
would play
decade,
anyway.
GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC computers.
Chris, this is horrible.
I know, man.
Specialized unit
I can do my essay right now, bro. I'm watching this bullshit.
Which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles.
Simple.
To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration.
Please, bro.
It's data.
You saw Xbox. It looks like a fridge, bro. Shut
I
up.
mean,
there's a specific set of
that
formats
doesn't
you
look
can
that
use.
bad now.
Variations
As I see
on
it.
the
I mean,
same
like
VDH
the
concept.
contents inside of it is
In
not
your
bad,
shader
but like
program,
the
you use a
If I get an
new
Xbox, bro,
that
I have a
adds
perfect place to put it, bro.
intersection
Right near
engine
the corner.
to
it's
check
like
against
it's more
the
convenient too,
VDH.
so like you just put it anywhere.
While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle
What
and
is
ray
this?
box intersections, the shaders
know
are
what
free
this
to use
is.
other.
I think he's
Having
talking about
said
ray
that,
tracing.
the
like
ray
how it
tracing
is.
instruction
Oh,
is
my mic.
pretty
Yeah, but like,
memory
what is
intensive,
this
so
shape,
it's a
bro?
good
I don't
mix
get this.
with
Come on,
logic.
man. You should know two geometry.
I failed
There's
it
of course
twice.
no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine
Full
on
ray tracing,
PlayStation
audio,
4.
shadows.
But
How was
it
audio ray
presents
tracing?
an opportunity for those
Another
interested.
Xbox. I'm saying.
I'm thinking it'll take
Unplug
less than
the
a million
robot.
rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations. With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing,
It's like a
it should
mini
be
fridge,
possible to
dog.
do some very nice
Store anything
global
you need.
illumination.
Water.
Having said that, adding ray traced
Bullet.
shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could
Bullet.
easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already
Just
seen a
watch
PlayStation
some
5
good
title that's
performance, wait.
successfully using ray tracing based reflections in complex animated scenes with
Just have
only
a couch.
modest.
Frequency. Wait.
Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency.
Frequency.
How big do we
Please
make the GPU,
be like-
and what frequency do we run it at? This
If
is a
it's not higher
balancing
than my
act.
CPU,
The
then
chip
that's
has a
sad.
If it's not high-
cost
exactly.
for whatever we use to
1,000
supply that
wait,
chip
wait.
with power
Ooh,
and to cool.
okay.
In general, I like running the
Four?
GPU
Okay, that's a
at higher
PS4 Pro.
frequency. Let me show you
That's a
why.
PS4 Pro. You guys see this,
Here's
right?
two possible configurations for
Bro,
a
why is
GPU
my thing so
roughly at the level
behind
of the
yours, bro?
PlayStation 4
Piss me off.
The
4.6
thought experiment.
teraflops.
Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number.
Tired about
But
teraflops,
actually,
bro.
the performance is noticeably
Oh,
different.
those are
because
real people.
teraflops
I saw
is
that dude
defined
move.
as the computational capability
Yo,
of the
you saw that
vector.
too?
You
Wait,
know,
hold up.
I was playing
That's
around,
just
right? They're
one
real
part of the
people.
GPU. There
I
are
thought
a
they were
lot of other
fakes.
units.
I was just playing
And
around.
those
Like
other
cardboard
units
people.
all run faster when the GPU frequency is
My
higher.
fault.
At 33% higher frequency,
That thick chip,
rasterization
yes,
goes
sir.
33%
Really big.
faster. Processing the command
Juicy.
buffer goes that much faster.
chip.
The L2
Alright, bro, I'm
other
dead
tasks
yawning, bro.
have
It's
that
crazy.
much higher bandwidth, and so on.
See,
About the only downside is that system
You
memory
talk so much-
is
exactly,
33%
bro.
further away.
I'm
in
dead
terms of
yawning,
cycles.
bro.
But the large
Why are you
number
smiling? of You didn't even
benefits
say anything
more than
good.
pay.
No.
As a friend of mine says, a rising tide.
But look at
lifts all
his
boats.
chin.
He's happy, bro.
Oh.
It's easier to
Man,
fully
you're happy
use
for
36
nothing.
I don't know how we
CPUs in parallel
remembers
than
this
it
whole
is to
thing,
fully
but
use
he's
48
pretty happy.
CPUs. When triangles are
Jesus.
small, it's much harder to fill all those.
I think he's reading
CPUs
something, bro.
with
There's no way.
So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues,
saw a
which
leak of the
frankly
controller?
we haven't always done
Is
the
it the
best
PS5?
job at. Part of the
No, it's a
reason for that
PS4.
is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power
It's too
isn't
good to be
simply
true,
about
exactly,
engine
bro.
quality. It's about the
You're saying
minutia of
anything?
what's being displayed
It's like
and
a
how.
PS Vita.
It's
These
counterintuitive
videos-
that processing
PS
dense
Vita,
geometry
yeah,
typically
wasn't garbage.
consumes less power
The
than
games
processing
look
simple
terrible,
geometry.
bro.
Oh yeah, the
Which is,
games are garbage.
I suspect, why Horizon's map
There were
stream
good games
with
on the
its
thing,
low
bro.
triangle
Like,
count makes
PlayStation
my
also
PS4
is good.
Pro
That stuff
heat
is
up so
fire.
much.
At all the PlayStation.
There's only
The
like two
process
good
on
games on
previous
PS Vita, bro.
consoles has been to try to
Freaking
guess
Dragon Ball,
maximum
Z,
power consumption
and,
during the
there's another
entire
game,
console
Need for
lifetime
Speed.
might be, which is to say,
I used to
the
play that
worst case
that free
scene
game,
in the
like where
worst
like you
case
just skate.
and
like,
prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major
Or-
256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock
This guy,
substantially
whoa.
lower or
No,
noticeably
well, maybe a
increase
little
the
bit,
size
a
of
little
the
bit.
power supply and fan.
That thing is
So,
big.
after much
Pause,
discussion,
man.
we decided to go with a
Pause.
very different direction on PlayStation 5.
Dirty.
We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2
36
CUs are
CUs.
large. Each has 62% more transistors than the
I have no
CUs
idea.
we were using on PlayStation 4. So, if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to
Yeah, let's
roughly
see, let's hear
58
this, let's hear
PlayStation
this.
How
4s.
come that did less though?
It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for
Yes,
PlayStation
yes.
5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solutions. It's a completely different paradigm.
You wanna
Rather
play
than
Kahoot?
running at
Let's
constant
go.
frequency and letting
After this
power
stream,
vary
Kahoot.
based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency
This
vary
just killed your
based
high.
on the workload.
Same.
We
bro.
then tackle the engineering
boring.
challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption
What?
the worst-case
There's
game
no
might
unknowns.
have.
No
Is he
need
gonna
to
show
gas.
the-
As
He's
for
gonna
the
show the
details
teardown
of the
today?
cooling solution, we're saving them
He's not
for our
showing the teardown
teardown.
today.
I think you'll be quite happy with what the
What is this-
engineering
what is
team
this stream
came
about?
up with. So, How fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy?
Bro, I swear to
The
God,
simplest approach would be to
if they don't
look at
show
the
nothing,
actual
y'all,
temperature
I'm
of
not.
the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a
Questions for our
consistent
teardown.
PlayStation
When's the
5
teardown?
experience. It wouldn't do
Is it
to
today?
run
Would
a
it be today?
console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the
longer SSD,
activities
bro.
that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes
SSD
everything
was so dumb.
deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels.
A few more
Benefits
pixels.
of this strategy are quite large. Running a
GPU
GPU at
frequency
2
capped at
gigahertz was
2.0.
looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact,
not
we
even
have
that
to
high.
cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and
3.5 gigahertz for the CPU.
Similarly, running the
not
CPU
bad.
at 3 gigahertz
That's not
was
higher than
causing
mine.
headaches with the old strategy.
Mine's
But
3.6.
now we can run it as high as
That's not
3.5
bad, though,
gigahertz.
Kurt.
That can
In
boost my
fact,
thing up to
it spends
4.
most of its time
Yo,
at
Lil,
that
hey, what's up, bro?
2.
That doesn't mean all games
How you
will
been,
be
homie?
running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5
How's your birthday?
gigahertz. When that worst case game arrives, it will run at
No,
a
I'm
lower
not
cost.
interested at all.
But
Until I
not
see
too
like
much lower.
physical.
To reduce power by 10%,
physical,
it
tangible
only takes a couple of clicks of
hardware.
reduction in frequency. So I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor.
Oh my God.
All things considered, the
Wanna
change
see
to a very
gameplay.
approach will show significant gains for
Mug.
PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about
Lies,
finding
bro.
new dreams. It's
Oh, my time with the
us
dream
as a hardware
again.
team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to
people
a
are
focus
watching this
on
trash.
as players, we
I was,
experience
like,
the game
talking
through the
about this,
visuals,
bro.
This is
through
comments,
audio,
bro.
and through the feedback
This
we
dude-
receive from the
this
controls,
is
such as
garbage.
rumble or haptics.
Keep saying it's boring
Personally,
too.
I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course,
games
important,
dead without
but
audio.
The
That's like,
impact of
what?
audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for
Yeah,
the
bro,
Jaguar
I don't
CPU
think this is
cores.
a. Look
Audio
at the
typically ends up
the
getting just
My
a
the
fraction of the
description,
That's
bro.
not much of a computational
Yeah, it says something about
resource,
I just.
particularly when
I
you
don't think
consider
this is
that the
actual
visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but
stuff,
audio
bruh.
processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on. It's been tough going making forward progress
I'm
on
one of
audio
the
in
thousands,
PlayStation
the
4.
hundred thousands of people.
particularly
Yes, sir.
almost a perfect device for audio rendering.
Yeah, Rumble is like
Simple
the worst thing to
pipelined
ever happen to
algorithms
controller,
could
but
really
I
take
just want it
advantage
to
of
be
asynchronous DNA
aesthetic.
and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio,
I don't use
as
Rumble,
well
bro.
as
That's
some
so
valuable
stupid.
experience.
I don't care
Not
about
to
audio,
oversimplify,
bro.
but here were our
It's the
goals for
same
audio on
thing.
PlayStation
You
4.
just plug it in
The first
and it
goal was great
works.
audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't
Yo,
be
bro, I might just
peripheral.
give me a bag of chips.
The
Yo,
second
guys,
goal
call me
was
back
to
when like
support
something crazy
hundreds
happens.
of
All
sound
right?
sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose
Get
what
me a
sound
bag
would
of
get 3D
Cheetos.
effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio
What's up,
sources
Spartan?
for
How you doing,
raindrops
bro?
hitting the ground, and all sorts of locations around you,
Gosh.
then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of
Let's
real
call him
presence
SSD
inside
boy.
the virtual world of the game.
My boy,
This has the
SSD.
capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly
bro.
enhance
This
know
is
what?
this is garbage. It's
Alright,
just
bro.
actually
To use
I'm hungry.
Dead Space as an example, I
Wait,
know
some game.
old school.
It's
You're
in
fighting
gameplay,
enemies
yeah,
in
bro.
fairly dark,
Text me
spooky
if anything
locations.
like anything crazy, bro.
Back in the
I'm gonna
day,
get
if you
something to eat.
played
I'm
the
hungry,
game
bro.
using the TV
This
speakers,
is
you could
boring as
tell that
fuck,
there
bro.